Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. And today I'd like to kick off with a quote. The world is burning. Now that's a headline you'll find if you flick through almost any major newspaper in the world today. And it certainly feels like it's true. From the radicalization of politics, wars, armed conflicts, and rapid changes to decades old foreign relations, our planet seems to be heading further and further into chaos. Now, no industry has been harder hit by these changes than the global import and export trade. And today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by a good friend of mine and someone who knows a lot about that. So Dhiraj is who will be joining us today. He's my guest, and he works as a director of online consumer brands at MG Globe. And those guys are a family-owned business with manufacturing and distribution of a wide range of products to wholesalers and retailers in many countries across the planet. With over 10 years of experience in this, Dhiraj has seen firsthand how the industry has been forced to adapt to these changes in recent years. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey Jordan, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
All good.
How you been?
So
Yeah.
yeah, look, I think we'd kind of kick off here by just if you could explain a little bit about your role, what it is you do, and about MG Globe.
Yeah, so what we do, we're a family-owned export sourcing company with offices in Hong Kong and China. We specialize in finding suppliers and manufacturers for products that our clients wish to sell locally and internationally. We assist in negotiating contracts, arranging end-to-end logistics, quality control. So in essence, we help our clients streamline their international supply chain operations.
Okay. And can you just walk me through that process? So how do you go from, a business reaching out to you or you kind of having that first conversation to actually kind of delivering that and getting product to their door?
Yeah. So usually we'll get like an inquiry, maybe overnight. For example, a certain model of a Bluetooth speaker, and what we'll do is we'll source by leveraging our experience and within our network of suppliers around the world to offer a proposal to our end client, highlighting different quotations of similar models or the exact same one from various suppliers with our advice, tips, comments, and if the client does accept and choose one of the offers, I always advise them to test a sample order first. So we'll arrange to have one or two pieces sent directly to the client, let them analyze and assess the product. And if they're satisfied, then we can move forward and place an order with the factory and begin mass production. And then if the product like a Bluetooth speaker, perhaps some countries require import certifications, like Europe would require an TUV certificate, or Brazil would require an Anatel certificate. We also arrange lab testing and audits in China as well, and around other countries in Southeast Asia. So yes, after the goods would be ready, then we would inspect the product, the packaging materials, the manuals, color box, the designs, the labeling, if they're for an e-commerce distribution, and then proceed with the final shipment.
Okay. And I'm assuming that most of your kind of sourcing is done from China. Is that correct? Or are there other markets that you're working in a lot?
I would say around 70% is from China, 60 to 70%. There's also other markets we source from, including Turkey, Indonesia, Korea, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, literally anywhere where they produce products. India as well is another one.
Okay. And has that kind of changed over time? I know we want to get into this separately and talk about China later, but yeah, have you seen kind of any shifts recently? And if so, to which countries?
Yeah, hugely. Mainly to those countries I just mentioned because of all the import tariffs that have been levied against Chinese goods internationally. But I think we can dive into that further. In terms of our markets that we sell to, we specialize in Latin America because we have family representation in Panama, Ecuador, and the Dominican Republic. So we mainly work with markets like Venezuela, Brazil, Paraguay, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and have built quite a strong presence of companies we work with over there.
Okay. That's an interesting mix. I like it. And then are there certain kind of industries, I guess, or sectors that you guys focus on?
Basically, we tackle all articles of products except for garments
Okay,
because that can become too labor intensive and capital intensive as well. So
interesting.
it can be anything except for that product category.
Okay. And are there anything that is there anything that you really like about your kind of job day to day? Because it's very different from most people we speak to who are just kind of working behind a laptop and just running advertising campaigns. What do you
Yeah,
like? What you do?
it's definitely the traveling aspect. I love exploring new cities and new cultures. I've visited so many places I don't think I would have otherwise had the chance to ever visit in my life. Like some of the third tier or fourth tier cities in China, for example, um, places in South America, cities in Indonesia, Korea. It's yeah, that's definitely for me one of the highlights of the work I do.
Okay. And what about dislikes? Is there anything you don't like?
Um, the biggest dislike would probably be that this profession requires you to work pretty much 24/7. It can be near impossible to switch off, especially when you're dealing with Asia during the day in
Different time zone.
yeah, exactly, different time zones, and then in the night you're working on the client side with Latin America, so it can get difficult, and then also juggling so many different languages can also be a challenge sometimes.
Yeah. Now, for those of us who don't know, Diraj and I originally met at university, so we went to school together. I was studying economics, and I think you were studying business management with economics, right? So a lot
Yeah.
of overlap. Can you walk me through the kind of journey from university to kind of where you are today and how you got there?
Yeah, correct. I did do business management, I think, with economics. So we did have a few overlap on a few modules. So actually, out of university, I did a couple internships. One of them being with an international tax advisory boutique, and I got to work out of their Hong Kong, Singapore, Sydney office, which was really cool, and learned a lot about the complexity of filing tax returns of wealthy expatriates. But after that, I finally got my first full time job. I was working in asset management in Hong Kong for
Nice.
Allianz Global Investors. They're just basically a pension fund manager. And I was a business analyst for the portfolio management and trading team there. So basically, I had to do all the mundane and project based work. But during my time there, the China A shares and China equities was all the rage. And with China just being over the border from Hong Kong, I had this opportunity on my lap to join the family business and travel into China. And it was something I couldn't refuse. So, in that sense, I pounced on the opportunity and managed to carve out my own division, focusing on just online brands in in these markets in Latin America. And then luckily the pandemic hit and e-commerce just went through the roof. So sometimes these things just happen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you're currently based in Hong Kong, right?
correct. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
currently sitting in Hong Kong. Yeah,
Okay. And you've had, from what I know, quite an international background. Can you just talk
yeah,
through that?
yeah. That's true. I am. It's quite a third culture or international background, you could say. I was actually born in Panama, hence the Latin American roots, and my parents are Indian. I'm Indian, but I've never lived there, and I've grown up in Hong Kong, studied in the UK, and then now run a business back here in out of Hong Kong. So I think that blend of upbringing has kind of it's very niche, and I guess also the work I do is quite niche as well. So I feel like it's a great blend and great mix, and it helps me build rapport on both the supplier side with Oriental culture and with the Latin American side with my clients. So I find that's a big strength actually that helps me excel in what I do.
For sure.
Yeah,
And I'm assuming you're based in Hong Kong because of the access to China. Is that correct?
exactly, exactly. But now actually China is a bit more easier to access from other countries. It's a lot more accessible than it once was, like 10 or 15 years ago.
Okay. Does that mean there's a move on the cards potentially, or are you just going to stay based in Hong Kong and kind of travel around?
Possibly, maybe to the UAE region or Singapore.
Okay.
It all depends. But even moving into China as well is a possibility. So
Okay.
we'll see. Yeah, I think technology has just accelerated the ease of being able to move around, and it's broken down a lot of culture barriers.
For sure.
Yeah, just the thing with China is that they don't use any of the apps that we use on our phone. So Google Translate won't work. Um, your Uber won't work. Your Facebook, Meta, WhatsApps are not going to work. So you really have to just dive in and download all the Chinese apps, and then there's a bit of a steep learning curve. But
Yeah.
once you get to use WeChat and all their powerful applications, then you like Alipay, WeChat Pay. No one uses cash over there. But once you get over that steep learning curve, you're gold over there, and
Okay.
it's fairly easy to
All
settle
business.
into that. Yeah,
Yeah.
and do
For sure.
business. Yeah.
Okay. And then something that I wanted to touch on. So you mentioned that, it's a family run business. How do you find that? Like, what are the pros? What are the cons? And how is it day to day?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. It's definitely not for everyone, but it can also be very difficult to switch off work when you're not in an office situation with your family. So I work with my dad and my younger brother, who's just come on board to the company.
Nice.
He was previously in the digital asset crypto industry on the project management side, but he's come in to help improve our operational processes and efficiency, and hopefully start an importation division with our company, selling foreign products on online marketplaces here into China. But yeah, I think the main difference to working a corporate job without family, it just feels so much more meaningful and worthwhile to be spending time and working with family as a team. Also, I feel really lucky in a way because I'm in a position where I can spend so much more time with family.
Yeah.
Because I think in the end, that's the people that are really most important to you in life. So it's a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's yeah. I can imagine it sometimes gets quite tough, right? Quite
yeah,
overwhelming.
yeah.
The next thing I wanted to touch on was China. So I know you guys connect, brands with wider Asian markets, but what specifically is it about China that makes it so attractive for businesses that are looking to source goods?
So I don't know, quite simply, like for physical manufactured goods, I don't think there's any other country in the world that can compete with China on like a price to quality ratio for products. And I think that's just because of the sheer size of the country in terms of their capital resources, like land and labor. I don't think any other country comes close. And also, some of the Chinese manufacturers are some of the hardest working individuals that I've ever encountered in life. Um, Across different industries, and they're reliable as well whenever it comes to lead time, quality, response. Um, they're excellent. So it's hard to see why people would want to switch without the implication of tariffs and levies being weighed upon
Mhm.
Chinese goods. Yeah,
And
there's a
aside
reason
from
why
that,
Apple. Yeah,
sorry, go
sorry.
on. You
No,
first.
no, sorry. No, I was just going to say there's a reason why like a company like Apple manufactures their goods in China. They're
Mhm.
the number one company in the world probably when it comes to selling physical hardware, technological goods, and they've been sourcing and manufacturing in China for a long time. So I think that's
Mhm.
just a good example of why you would source from China.
I wanted to touch on that because I wanted to ask, how have you seen the Chinese market change over time? And it's certainly my understanding that previously maybe businesses didn't want to source their most kind of technical products from China, and they would manufacture them elsewhere. But now China has that kind of technological advantage. Is that a fair point? And what else has changed kind of in the time that you've been working with China?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point because of reverse engineering and all that was taking place in China. That's why I'm a bit surprised. Actually, Tesla opened up a factory in Shanghai when they did, because I think that gave a lot of insight into how EVs operated, and they were obviously first into the market, and now China have just completely overtaken the game in
Mm.
EVs. We've got about 15 leading EV manufacturers in China, And I think that's why you're seeing the US just impose a 100% EV tariff upon uh,
Yeah.
their imports into the US.
Before
So,
we get into that kind of
yeah.
embargoes and tariff situation, are there
Yeah.
any other kind of maybe bureaucratic challenges or cultural issues or things that you have to work through when doing business with China?
Not at all, actually. Surprisingly, they're actually totally accepting. They're very supporting, helpful. The Chinese suppliers, they have zero discrimination towards foreigners, whether you're from Africa, Asia, or America, or Europe. Um, they're great to work with, actually. Being an export manager in China, working for a factory, is actually seen as to be quite a prestigious and desired job, as it gives a channel for the locals to actually travel for work, learn more about foreign cultures through their buyers. And it really comes across from some of the people I work with.
Nice. And then moving on to the kind of elephant in the room, I guess, with the tariff situation. Can you just give, a high level summary of what is going on now, and then talk about how that's kind of impacted you guys?
Yeah, so we've been mainly impacted by the second order or downstream effects of all these tariffs that have been weighed upon the Chinese EVs, because they've been flooding the U.S. with shipments, South America as well, as they raised taxes to 18% this year. So I've seen videos from like custom brokers I work with in South America of the ports just flooded with EVs, and because of that, we've seen freight prices shoot up to about 10 to 12,000, which we're getting back into COVID levels. But of course, we've got additional factors such as the Middle Eastern conflict,
Yeah.
and we had the Suez Canal incident. There's a bridge in Baltimore that just went down. So it's just been factors such as these that have caused global shipping rates to skyrocket, and as a result, I think we're seeing a bit of a downturn in global exports coming out of China.
Mhm.
Um, so it'll be interesting to see how the future unfolds. We're definitely living in very uncertain times.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Are there also delays on shipment times as well? Or is it just kind of
Um,
price gone up?
yeah, delays because we have there's an additional route that vessels had to take during the Houthi attacks near Yemen. And also, there's delays in even getting empty containers now because all the Chinese EVs are just grabbing every empty container they can get to try and ship their cars before the tariffs
Yeah.
are imposed.
Okay. And those tariffs are they pre-Trump or pre-potential Trump win?
I believe they're pre-Trump. I believe
Okay,
they
so
come
it's a
in before.
100% tariff on
Yeah,
EVs. Are there
on
other sectors
Chinese.
that are impacted as well, or is it just electronic vehicles?
That's the main one that I know of. There might be more, but I haven't looked into that too much,
Okay, it's
as I'm more
interesting
focused on the Latin American market.
for sure. Touching on that, then, so are there kind of markets that you think will pick up the slack from China that are potentially up and coming or already in that kind of number two spot?
Um, yeah, I would say India is a good one right now. Their economy is doing super well. Um, GDP is quite high, single digits, and they're also quite good in terms of quality to price. They produce a lot of industrial machinery, electronic appliances, a lot of food items. I would say they're a good market to look out for. Obviously, they just made the latest iPhone for Apple as well, the iPhone 15. But of course, we did see some issue on the rollout. The phones were heating up, and that's a good example of, again, the risks you take of sometimes switching out your supply chain from China to another country.
Do you think kind of
Bangladesh,
offshore China is still kind of number one in terms of quality?
for the quality to price ratio, yes, certainly,
Okay.
certainly for sure.
And then if we just look at the industry as a whole, have there been any other changes in the last 5 years or so that have really changed global supply chain or how it is you guys have done business?
Yeah, actually, a lot has changed during COVID. So something the world, I think, realized during the pandemic was how fragmented our global supply chain was and how critical China was to the global supply chain. when it came to its role, particularly in medical supplies. So in theory, I think a lot of these big countries like the US, the UK, I think they're looking to bring their supply chains closer to home, or preferably within their home countries. But I just don't think it's a very practical solution. And frankly, I think it would be too expensive to pull off. And if they don't, I mean, if they stop importing the actual finished medical supplies or whichever product they want to bring domestic, I think they would still very likely have to source spare parts, raw materials, other products still from overseas and likely China. But I think we're going to see this more in the future, and it's definitely a trend that's going to continue. We're seeing it in the U.S. as well in the semiconductor industry, with subsidies being given to Taiwan Semiconductor to build fabrication plants up in Arizona, so they won't have to rely on an international supply chain. And I think that also goes and ties into national defense with AI, and we
Mhm.
can go down a long rabbit hole there.
That's interesting. Okay, so do you think this is a long term trend that's here to stay, or do you think this is just a kind of post COVID with figuring things out?
I think definitely, I think that's something that's here to stay.
Okay.
Because simply because a country doesn't want to have a supply chain dependency on another country, especially when it could be potentially linked to an emerging technology like AI. I feel like US learned from their lesson by not supporting the EV industry enough, by giving enough support to a company like Tesla.
Yeah.
And they went over to Shanghai, opened a facility in Germany, and I think it's given those other markets a head start, and the US have potentially lost out on a lot of money there.
Hmm. And just touching on, you mentioned AI, and you can't go on a podcast nowadays and not talk about it. I'd imagine in an industry like yours that it's still reliant on kind of physical processes, things being built and moved around. So AI is yet to have a big impact. Is that a fair comment, or am I wrong with that?
Um, I think it is actually in certain segments of the industry. I've heard a lot of companies are reducing the number of designers they're hiring because they're using tools such as Midjourney, where they can go on and create mock-ups of products or mock-ups of t-shirt designs, for example, things like that, and then send them over to factories and have them try and make rough physical samples. That's an interesting way that the industry has been adopting AI. Another one I've seen from my end client side is harvesting product reviews on e-commerce marketplaces like Amazon, Facebook, and basically using those reviews and going through the data to find the most common defects, and then feed that back to manufacturers before they start the process, so we can entirely avoid those issues with quality at all before
Okay.
they even come up. So
Interesting.
that's quite cool. And then maybe Chat GPT as well, to general productivity
Yeah.
efficiencies could be found there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now I know a lot of what you guys do is not just source, but carry out quality control for products. Could you just explain the process and talk about how you ensure, a high level of quality with the products that you source?
Yeah. So we've got an office also in China, that we've got three quality QC professionals working there. So I think it depends on the product. For example, during the pandemic, we sourced a lot of gaming chairs for online sellers, and I think the QC process really starts at the initial sourcing stage itself. You need to be certain that the model you're being quoted for, that you want to purchase, has the exact components listed on the initial contracts that you sign with the factory. Like, for example, for a gaming chair, you need the mechanism to be the exact same, the class of the gas lift, the stitching on the chair, the colors, the embroidery of the logo, thus for the fabric of the PU leather, for example. Um, so it's important to not be naive and sift through all these things. But then when the goods are initially ready, it is very important to go and inspect it firsthand, test all the test a batch sample of the chairs, make sure the angles line up. it's all consistent, the quality, and then also negotiate for spare parts, because for sure nothing is going to be 100%
Yeah.
perfect. So it's important to also negotiate for spare parts under an agreed warranty or guarantee policy. But of course, if you're manufacturing something comprehensive like an air fryer or an electric oven, there are many world class QC companies that can perform all the necessary testing required
Mhm.
to make sure your products are in good shape, because one bad shipment where you have product defects can completely ruin your P&L for the year. So it is a very crucial stage of the supply chain
For sure.
process.
As part of that QC, will you guys, have agents go to the factories, or is it just kind of inspecting the product in your office?
No, no, it's on site at the factory, and even upon the loading, when the goods are loaded into the containers for shipment, that's also supervised as well.
Okay, so there's kind of multiple touch points throughout that process.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. Because the documentation has to be completely in line with what's being loaded in the container, like down to the number of pieces, number of boxes, the contents of what's inside the boxes is extremely crucial. Otherwise, you could even have issues with import customs at the final destination.
Yeah. One thing I did want to ask on this is what's the difference in process between, let's take the chair kind of example and something that's a lot more technical or involves, electrical components, different parts, like let's say the air fryer that you talked about. How do those two processes vary?
So the components would make a big difference. The quality, where they're sourcing like electric motors, for example, in an air fryer. You would also need to get that tested by a laboratory in China, because certain markets, there's health and safety regulations that products have to pass as well. So you would have to also maybe do a factory audit where you get someone from that lab testing agency, a lab that is maybe partnered with TUV from Europe, or IE, or in Brazil, there's the In Metro as well. So that's another important additional step that you might have to take when it comes to products like this that could potentially harm and cause damage to the end user.
Yeah. So is that dependent on where you're shipping the product to? The kind of
Exactly.
regulations are different.
That kind of drives it. But if you want to be extra safe and more confident about the quality of your products, then it's I would recommend you to also take the additional lab testing stage.
Okay. And are the, factories or manufacturers in China kind of actively following those safety protocols, or are they only doing that because you're kind of asking them to in these kind of situations?
Oh no, they're very professional. They actually have QC labs within their own factory. Depends obviously on the factory you're working with, but the best factories over there will have drop test rooms. They'll have temperature control rooms. They'll have rooms where they test the full battery life of the product, and they'll keep it running for up to like 60 days at a time. They're actually very, very comprehensive and professional.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
And then it sounds like there's a lot of stuff that you have to keep abreast of, from these macroeconomic trends to what's going on in the world to, international rules and regulations. What do you use to kind of stay on top of that stuff? And I'm thinking here, tools, sources of information, etc.
Yeah, definitely. It's super important to be on track with current trends and macroeconomic conditions. So I think that might stem from my previous job in financial markets. I read a lot of Bloomberg, Financial Times for FX, commodity prices, general market trends, and of course, it's very important to know the exchange rate between CNY and USD if you are doing business with China or any other emerging market economy, because the weaker a domestic currency is, the more cheaper it is for you to import it if you live in the United States or in Europe or in the UK. So that's a key point to look at. In terms of information about freight and transport, we have a large network of freight forwarders and customs brokers around the world that we work with. So we usually rely on information direct from the source, so first party research. For product trends and things like that, we use sources like Twitter, Douyin, which is like the Chinese equivalent of TikTok. Taobao as well is very good at finding viral products, and Alibaba is always useful for sourcing and finding rough estimates of prices. So I'd probably point to those three or four things.
Hmm. Okay. And I guess these relationships that you guys have are built up over decades. It's not just a 3 month play, right?
Yeah, exactly. Some of my clients today are the children and offspring of some of my father's clients, to be, for example, and family members like that. So that's how we've continued to start growing the business.
For sure.
Yeah.
And next question is just kind of building on that. Is there a number one thing or a few things that a business like yourselves needs to do in order to be successful and yeah, avoid failure?
I think you just have to be honest and transparent as a intermediary, because that's what we are at the end of the day. We're intermediaries. So if we're responsible and honest, I think that's all you can ask for.
Hmm. So it's a relationship driven model. And now, obviously, vendors play a key role in that and in what you guys do. What are some red flags that you kind of look out for or maybe see when you're visiting trade offence factories or whatever with those guys?
So I think the main thing that we need to look out for, or the main red flag, is when we find trading companies posing as factories. That actually happens a lot at trade expos and sometimes even at factories. So sometimes you could enter a showroom in a factory and it's got their logo of this trading company, and they'll pretend like they are the owner of the factory and they have control over the whole production line, but actually they're not, and they're just trying to pretty much be an additional sales division of that factory and upsell you on certain things.
So that a trading company is kind of sitting in the middle of that relationship between the factory and you guys, or what is their
Exactly.
role?
They're like an additional intermediary, because some buyers might not want to buy, for example, one or two models per container. They might want a larger variety or spread in the container. And that's something that maybe the factory won't directly offer. They'll require a lot higher minimum order quantity. So, what a trading company will do is combine orders among three or four clients, take a bit more risk, and and then distribute the order amongst their three or four clients.
Okay, so that means kind of higher cost that they pass along. So you guys try and cut them out of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And then on the other side of the kind of equation, what are the ideal client? What does that look like for you? Like, who do you enjoy working with, and what's your focus?
Um, Honestly, it's anyone who's just a good person, nice. They treat people with respect. A lot of people that come to Asia might treat certain people in a derogative manner, especially like waiting staff and people like that. So as long as you're nice, you're honest, you pay on time, obviously, and then yeah, that's an ideal client.
Cool. Okay. And are there certain sectors that you want to focus on or kind of grow into going forward?
Um, I think we would like to take on a few more online brands right now, but I
Okay.
do know that the freight situation doesn't really enable a lot of new businesses to start right now, because costs are just high and competition might eat you alive. Because if you ship now at the current rates, your average cost of your products will be quite high in compared to people that might have bought at the beginning of the year. So
Yeah.
if it's a niche product, then yeah, you could potentially start now. But I think that the time to actually launch a business would be maybe towards the end of this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there a certain size minimum brand that you guys work with, or when does it make sense to start using someone like yourselves?
Um, we work with companies of all sizes actually.
Okay.
an Instagram business with 5,000 or 10,000 or so followers to up to 100,000, things like that.
Okay. So, Dhiraj, been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on today. For those of the listeners who are looking to find out more information on you guys or are looking for some help, how can they best get in contact with you?
Probably by Twitter. My handle is at Dhiraj Mukhi, and by email, Dhiraj at mgglobe.com. Those would probably be the best ways to reach me.
Perfect. Well, I'll put the information in the description box below this
Awesome.
video. And yeah, as I said, thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, Jordan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
All right.